The invasion of Europe was supposed to begin on June 5, 1944. Months of planning, millions of men, and the hopes of the free world, all aimed at one day. But on the eve of history, everything began to fall apart. The sea turned violent, the wind howled across the English Channel, and General Dwight D. Eisenhower faced a decision that would decide the fate of the entire war. For 2 years, the Allies had been building toward one moment, the return to Europe. They called it Operation Overlord, but everyone knew it by another name, D-Day. This was no ordinary invasion. It was the largest amphibious assault in human history. Nearly 3 million troops had been assembled in southern England. Thousands of ships were waiting in secret ports. Paratroopers were already rehearsing jumps behind enemy lines. Everything depended on perfect coordination and perfect weather, but the North Atlantic doesn't care about human plans. As June 1944 arrived, the Channel was gripped by one of the worst storms in years. The winds churned the sea into chaos. Waves slammed against the ships waiting in harbour. Low clouds and rain made air operations impossible, and every hour of delay risked disaster. Eisenhower sat in a cramped room at Southwick House, surrounded by his top commanders, Air Chief Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory, Admiral Bertram Ramsay, General Bernard Montgomery, and his trusted meteorologists. In front of them lay a giant map of the French coast, 5 invasion beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. They all knew that once the first men landed, there was no going back. If the weather was too rough, the landing craft would capsize. If the skies were too cloudy, bombers couldn't hit their targets. If the tides were wrong, the soldiers would run straight into obstacles and mines. Timing was everything. The invasion required a specific combination: a full moon for visibility, a low tide at dawn to expose the German defenses, and calm seas for the crossing. That window existed only a few days each month. Miss it, and they would have to wait weeks. But waiting meant the risk of German discovery, collapsing morale, and the entire operation being exposed. The tension in that room was unbearable. The meteorologists began their report. They warned of a massive low-pressure system sweeping in from the Atlantic. Winds gusting up to 40 miles an hour, cloud ceilings dropping to just a few hundred feet, visibility near zero. If they went on June 5th, the paratroopers would be scattered, the landing craft would sink, and the bombers would be useless. Eisenhower leaned back in silence. Around the table, his generals shifted uneasily. Montgomery, confident as ever, argued that they should wait one day. Ramsay, responsible for the fleet, warned that the storm would destroy the operation before it began. Everyone looked to Ike. He had to make the call. This wasn't just a military operation, it was the liberation of an entire continent. If it failed, it could set the war back years and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. At 4:15 a.m., Eisenhower finally spoke. He delayed the invasion by 24 hours. The words were simple, but the weight was crushing. Thousands of ships were already at sea. Some had to be recalled. Men who thought they would land in France that morning were suddenly told to wait. The seasickness, the nerves, the constant uncertainty, it was torture. And as the storm grew worse through June 5th, it looked like Eisenhower's gamble had failed. Winds battered the coast of England. Rain flooded the airfields. Landing craft were tossed like toys in the Channel. The invasion, it seemed, might have to be postponed indefinitely. But then, just as hope began to fade, a break appeared. James Stagg, the chief meteorologist, rushed into Eisenhower's headquarters early on June 5th with unexpected news. A brief window of calmer weather was approaching. The storm would ease by the morning of June 6th. It wouldn't be perfect, but it might be just enough. Eisenhower called another meeting. The room was tense, the air thick with exhaustion. Stagg explained that the winds would drop and the cloud cover would lift for roughly 36 hours. After that, another storm would hit. It was now or never. Montgomery immediately pushed to go ahead. Ramsay hesitated, knowing the fleet would be sailing through dangerous seas. Air commanders worried about accuracy. Everyone had doubts, but they all knew delay could destroy the invasion entirely. Eisenhower stood silently, staring at the weather charts. He paced back and forth, gripping his hands behind his back. No one spoke. Finally, he turned to his commanders and asked, "Do you think the troops can handle it?" Montgomery nodded firmly. "Yes, sir, they can." Eisenhower paused for a long moment. Then he said 4 words that changed history. "Okay, let's go." Those words unleashed the largest military operation the world had ever seen. Within hours, thousands of ships began moving across the channel. Paratroopers boarded their planes. Men wrote letters home they feared would be their last, and Eisenhower, utterly alone, sat in his trailer outside headquarters, writing a small note he hoped he'd never have to use. It was a message taking full responsibility if the invasion failed. He wrote, "If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." He tucked the paper into his wallet. At dawn on June 6th, the skies cleared just enough for the operation to begin. The sea was rough but manageable. The paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines under heavy fire. At 6:30 a.m., the first landing craft hit the beaches of Normandy. The battle for Europe had begun. Eisenhower's decision to delay by 1 day proved to be one of the most critical calls of the entire war. Had he gone ahead on June 5th, the storm would have smashed the fleet, scattered the paratroopers, and possibly doomed the entire invasion. Had he delayed further, the next storm would have forced weeks of postponement, and the Germans might have discovered the build-up. Even with the 1-day delay, it was still a brutal fight. At Omaha Beach, the conditions were far from ideal. Strong winds and rough tides pushed landing craft off course. Many soldiers drowned before reaching shore, but somehow they pushed through. By nightfall, 156,000 Allied troops had landed in France. The long road to Berlin had begun. Afterward, Eisenhower admitted how close the decision came to breaking him. He told reporters, "The question was, should we go or not go? And finally I said, let's go. I had to decide. There was no one else." He barely slept for days leading up to the invasion. Every life lost weighed on him personally, but he also knew that hesitation had cost others before him. In 1940, France had waited too long to act. In 1941, the Soviets had hesitated before responding to Hitler's attack. Eisenhower would not make the same mistake. The decision showed not just courage, but leadership under unimaginable pressure. He had to weigh the fate of millions of men against a few hours of uncertain weather. He had to trust his instincts and a sliver of hope from his meteorologists. In that moment, he became more than just a general. He became the man who carried the destiny of the free world on his shoulders. When historians look back, they often call June 6th the longest day. But for Eisenhower, the longest day might have been the one before it, the day he chose to wait, the day he risked everything by doing nothing. And it's easy, decades later, to see it as inevitable, that D-Day would succeed, that the Allies would break through, that Hitler's empire would collapse. But on that night in June 1944, nothing was certain. The entire war balanced on a decision made in a single room, by a man staring at clouds he couldn't control. The irony is that Eisenhower's calm exterior often hid the torment he felt inside. He had ordered thousands of young men to face near-certain death. He had no guarantee his decision was the right one. In private, he often said leadership meant having to make decisions when you know you might be wrong. And that night, he lived those words. As the ships disappeared into the fog, Eisenhower drove to visit the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne. He walked among them, smiling, joking, pretending everything was fine. One soldier remembered him saying, "Full victory, nothing else." It was all the reassurance they needed. A few hours later, he watched the transport planes take off into the dark. He stood silently, eyes fixed on the sky. Then he turned away and whispered to an aide, "I hope to God I'm right." By the next evening, he knew he was. The beaches were secured, the bridgeheads were forming, the gamble had paid off. The day Eisenhower chose to delay D-Day wasn't just about weather, it was about wisdom, courage, and the understanding that sometimes restraint is the greatest act of leadership. He didn't know the skies would clear, he didn't know his decision would succeed, but he believed in his men, and that belief changed the course of history. Even now, decades later, we can trace the line of freedom back to that one sleepless night, when a storm raged, a room of generals waited, and a single man whispered, "Okay, let's go."